right, I'll invite you to take your seats so that we can get started. I'm very happy that you're all with us this morning. We have several important things that we're going to be doing today. In the morning and the afternoon, we're going to be focusing on issues that were raised in our book, A Battle Plan for Supporting Military Families, but it's really not about the book. It's about the work and the conversation and the goals in the book, and you'll hear more about that as the day progresses. At lunchtime, we're going to have the pleasure and privilege of honoring some great researchers and the work they've produced. I know that we still have people coming, and there will be people coming in the middle of the day who will be just here for that portion. So when we get to the working sessions, we'll sort of juggle around and make sure that everybody is with another group of folks. We are obviously today being hosted in this beautiful space that AUSA has generously provided, and I'm really grateful to Patty Barron for making it possible for us to be here, and I want to welcome her and invite her to introduce General Swan to us.
Good morning, everybody. So happy to see you all here today. I wore my Power Red lipstick today just for you all because I know we're going to have a very impactful day. Just real quick before I introduce General Swan, I wanted to give you a little bit of a history of why we think this is so important here at AUSA. Shelley and I have had the pleasure of knowing each other for quite a few years. And 3 years ago, the convening of really what was the start of the book that you are going to be talking about today really inspired us at AUSA to think about how we could get more involved in some of the issues that are impacting all of our military families. It certainly made an awful lot of sense to work with Shelley in any way that we could, and we are just so honored to be able to partner with her, and we hope to continue this partnership as we move forward and hopefully in many, many other ways, and always thinking about hosting events here at AUSA. What I'd like to do right now is introduce my boss, a gentleman that just is so passionate about the work that he does. He is a previous commander of the Military District of Washington. He was also in charge of the Congressional Liaison Office of Congressional Liaison for the Army. And he happens to be a retired three-star general who I believe, did you escort Mrs. Reagan or Mrs. Ford during the funeral of the late President Gerald Ford? So he has quite a resume. But more than that, he is a man that I really admire because he really allows this to happen. Whenever I have one of my great ideas, he's one of my biggest cheerleaders and allows many things to happen in order to support military families. So without further ado, please let me introduce my boss, Lieutenant General retired Guy Swan.
Thank you. You can pull that back out, Shelley, when you need it. If I stand up on that thing, it's a little too high. But good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Association of the United States Army. As Patty said, I'm Guy Swan. I'm the Vice President for Education here at the Association. And on behalf of my boss, General Retired Carter Ham, Christie's here today on his behalf. Welcome to the General Gordon R. Sullivan Conference and Event Center. That's what this facility is. Those of you familiar with the Army know General Sullivan as our 32nd Army Chief of Staff and former longtime president of the association. And General Ham always likes to remind audiences that right outside the door here in the lobby, there's a plaque with General Sullivan's face on it. And if you rub his chin, that is thought to bring good luck. So take a minute to rub his chin. I think it's already getting a little bleached out there from all the touching. But we're glad to be able to host today with Shelley and the Military Family Research Institute. Patty and her assistant, Thea Green, who you met out front, are really a woman shop that we have here at AUSA, but I can tell you we get a lot of mileage out of these two ladies, well connected in this community, and we are proud to host this event today. Patty's right. Whenever she has a good idea, I'm the one that has to go to General Ham and say it's a good idea to support it. But this one is a good idea, and we're very happy. I think overshadowing today's discussion, probably as much as anything else, is the result of last week's election. And any of us that are connected with the armed services, with national security, with the defense of the nation, are cautiously watching what the change in the Congress means, certainly in terms of funding for our armed forces and those that support our armed forces. And I think that's something that we'll be considering and talking about throughout the day. As you can imagine, family programs and veteran family programs oftentimes are bill payers for other priorities in the armed forces. That's a fact of life. You all live that every day, and I don't think that's going to change. In fact, things may get somewhat more challenging here in the coming year or two as we change over the House and the relationships inside our government. Other things that are changing too, when many of us got involved with military families and veteran families, we were at the height of major combat operations around the world in Afghanistan and Iraq primarily. Those combat operations, thankfully, are less stressful than they were, certainly fewer troops in those parts of the world than we've had before. But the pace of operations for our military and for our families has not changed because we've shifted now to rotational assignments to places like Poland, the Baltic countries, and in Korea, certainly for the Army, as well as for some of the other services. So while our troops are not necessarily in combat operations or in harm's way every day, they are separated from their families on a scale not unlike it was at the height of our major efforts in those theaters. I think what that means for this group and for all of us, frankly, that love our military families and want to take care of them is that we need new thinking. We need creative thinking about the world we're facing. This is not 2006, 2007, the surge in Iraq and all of that. This environment is different, and I would ask all of you to keep that in mind, that you, us, we all have to adjust to what the current environment is in taking care of our families. The mission is no less important than it was in those days, but in order to get to the end state we want to get to will require some new and creative thinking. And that'll come from organizations like MFRI, from AUSA, the organizations you represent, academia, the broader nonprofit military service organization, VSO community. We're all in this together for a very, very good purpose. So you've got a lot of work ahead of you today. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I do want to personally thank you. I'm a military husband and a parent. My son is a young lieutenant now, so he's starting off on his career. So whatever you do today is going to affect him and his life as well. So again, thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Shelley, thank you.
Don't run away quite yet, General Swan. Wait, General, don't run away. Sorry, I didn't. We want to leave you with a little bit of MFRI sweat. We want our name around this building too, so we've got a little water cup for you.
Thank you, Shelley. Thank you very much.
Stay hydrated.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
I am going to use this step. I've never had one before. It's kind of nice. Okay, let me find my place here. We're very excited that today's event is being live streamed, and thank you very much to the great AV support that we have here at AUSA. And we're just so grateful for Patty's enthusiasm about the kind of work that we're trying to do. You've been a wonderful partner all the way along, and your enthusiasm is really very infectious. I'm happy that you're all here today, and I want to be clear that today's event has impact hopefully far beyond today. So this is an opportunity today for you to spend some time thinking about issues that hopefully will be useful to your organization in the future, so you can be very self-focused while you're here. But the work that you're doing today also will feed into additional work. And so the lessons that the leaders who contributed to the battle plan effort, the lessons that they identified, we now are trying to make real. And Barbara Thompson is helping us with that, and we're going to be producing short publications that will be capturing some of those lessons and be disseminated out through a variety of channels in the military and veteran community. And your work here today will be intended not only to help you think about your own organization in the future, but it will generate insights that will be useful to other organizations and feed into these publications that will be produced. So your work here today is service to the community, as well as hopefully giving you some time to think about strategic issues in your own organization. We have a few rules of engagement to suggest today. To the extent that you can, try to focus on what's going on in the room as opposed to what's going on outside of the room. Please feel free to share any information that you want. We'll operate with the idea that it will stay here, and that if people repeat anything, it'll be, of course, without attribution. Try to use specific examples where you can. We'll do some, try to do some roll up the sleeves planning. We may have a disagreement. I hope we do. I hope we have vigorous debate. But remember, we're always debating about ideas and not people. And of course, be sensitive to the possibility of conflicts of interest. We will begin today with a panel of presenters who are experts in a variety of ways. Each of the panelists today was an author and contributed a chapter to the book where they were reflecting about their own organizational space and lessons for the future. And remember, what we're trying to do is help organizations prepare now for the next time that transformational change will be required of them. The leaders who contributed to this effort are people who have been involved for a long time in responding to the demands that the current conflict have imposed. And I think what many leaders have shared is reflections that they were required to transform their organizations. They weren't really ready. And of course, every conflict is different, and we don't know exactly what is going to be required to be ready the next time transformational change is required. But this is an opportunity to think about what that might be. How can your organization be a little more ready? And so today we have some activities for you to engage in that will be useful, hopefully to you, but also to other organizations. As I introduce each panelist, I'll ask them to come up and take their seats. We'll begin with Barbara Thompson. She's the former director of the Office of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Military, Community, and Family Policy. She retired in 2017 after holding the role for 11 years. Barbara was responsible for programs and policies that promoted military families' well-being, readiness, and quality of life. She had purview over military family readiness programs and supported the rebuilding of the Ministry of Education in Iraq. And at a break, I can tell you a story about how I got to see that work. It was amazing. Barbara produced one of the documents you have in your materials called Building Your Battle Plan, First Responders, which we hope you will use as you work through today's activities. And Barbara will be working on additional documents over the coming months. Next, I'm pleased to welcome William Cahill to the front. He is a vice president at Express Scripts Incorporated. He oversees the company's DoD programs and has spent the last decade working in the healthcare industry. Prior to his private sector work, he served 10 years with the U.S. Senate's Committee on Veterans Affairs, including time as chief of the committee. His chapter offers excellent advice for advocates working with Congress, as well as, I think, some provocative guidance for legislators themselves. Will Boss is Vice President of Talent for Comcast's Northeast Division. He is also a captain in the U.S. Navy Reserve, specializing in the field of cryptologic warfare. He has a combined 27 years of active and reserve service. His chapter focused on the corporate and industry sectors. And like Barbara, he has now become a member of MFRI's Advisory Council, and we're very grateful for their involvement. Mary Keller is the president and CEO of the Military Child Education Coalition. As a school administrator for over 21 years, she witnessed the challenges military families face in times of transition. She's widely regarded as an expert on education issues related to highly mobile, military-connected students. We'll be honored to learn from all of them today in a couple of minutes. The ancestry of this event actually began, well, to most people it seemed like it began in 2015. It actually probably began about 2 years before that, because Joyce Razor and I started talking about lessons and you know, what have we learned and what do we want leaders of tomorrow to understand. And I spent more than a year kind of workshopping the idea with a bunch of folks, including at one of the White Oak meetings. There were people from the White House there, and we kept talking about how to try to capture what leaders had learned and capture the things that they wish they had done, the things they wish they hadn't done, the things that they could do now to be ready for the future. So we convened a meeting here in Washington in 2015. And presenters and attendees included congressional representatives, executive branch, DoD leaders, as well as leaders from corporations, philanthropy, behavioral health, higher education, basically every sector of society that we saw responding to the needs of military and veteran families. Because it's not DoD and VA who do it by themselves, right? And it's not Congress that does it by itself. There are many, many organizations. We've all heard that, you know, the statements about 40,000 organizations have sprung up. Well, it's all of them and all of the rest. And so the presentations that day gradually evolved then into chapters in the book, which is kind of an after-action report, if you will, about military and veteran families. And our goal is to try to battle plan for families and for veterans the way that we battle plan lots of other things in the military space. So the goal is to try to capture lessons learned, but guidance for the future. What would you tell the person sitting in your chair when transformational change is required? You have in your materials a one-pager that we created especially for today that gives you a sampling of some of the recommendations from the book. We encourage you to keep that close by as we go through the working sessions a little later. You also have in your materials a copy of MFRI's Measuring Communities report. That's the 2018 report. We hope that that will be an annual report that we consider a kind of report card for the nation about how we're doing with regard to military and veteran families, and sharing information about every area of the country and issues there. I want to alert you that the report is attached basically to a website where you can look up information. You can print out a snapshot of your county very quickly, any county you're interested in, and you can create custom materials that you can use in your own work, and we hope that you will. If you would like an ID for your organization, we'd be happy to provide that for you, because it's a way that allows us to document how other organizations are using the information, and that helps us continue to garner the support that we need to continue that work. One of the top requests from the original battle plan convening was that we use its outcomes for future conversations and action. No one wanted all of the work that they did to sit on a shelf and collect dust. Everybody agreed that we should gather for discussions and tabletop activities that kind of force us to do the work that they were recommending occur. And so that's why we are here today. This is our attempt to honor their guidance and their wish. So you now join an elite group of high-level leaders who are working to create transformational, evidence-informed change for military and veteran families. We really appreciate your dedication and commitment and taking time from what I know are very busy schedules. So I'm now going to turn to our panelists and give them the floor for a little while. We're going to go down the table, starting with Barbara, and we'll give them each an opportunity to make some remarks, and then I'm going to have some follow-up questions for them. So please, Barbara.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm really pleased to be here. And to start off, what I think is the goal of the battle plan is to put what we documented into practice. And I have to say that I was not able to do this chapter until I retired. And that's what's really sad. We never have time while we're working to reflect on what has transpired, what worked, what didn't work, and where do we go for the future. So I really do think the battle plan gave us the opportunity to look at what needs to happen holistically. So there are the different authors have come from different backgrounds, and that's what makes it such a good book, because it's going to apply to everybody in some shape or form. I think of it as a work in progress, and it will better prepare us for the future, regardless of what that will be or when it'll be. I think the idea is, my advice would be, and I've read the book from cover to cover, is to find where you best fit in your organization, which chapter kind of aligns with your organization, to really dig deeply into what was learned from that organizational perspective, and then move out into the other chapters. I learned a lot by reading what other people were experiencing that I had no idea of as I was in the process of trying to develop and work on behalf of military families. So we want to have a much more holistic view of the larger picture of who is involved, what's involved, when we're looking at ways to support military families and veteran families. We know that military life presents challenges both during war and peacetime, and we can't overlook that. Right now, as General Swan said, we're at a different lull in what was in 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, but it doesn't mean that the challenges that military families are not there. And I think we all know that we overlay life's challenges with the military lifestyle. And so we have to be prepared to support military families regardless of what what's happening in the environment. One thing, if you can take away something from my presentation and my chapter, chapter 3, is that policy changes systems. And while it's not the most fun thing to do, it really will make the most impact on how we support military families. Whether the policy comes from law, which really helps when it's driven by law, but the policy will make a difference in the way we approach how we take care of military families. And the thing that I would also say is we need to make sure that it's equitable across branches and across components. One of the things that we learned in this particular conflict is that we needed to take better care of our Guard and Reserve families. And they're not near military installations where the support systems are in place. So how do we do that? And that was a lesson learned where we learned about the needs of Guard and Reserve families that we had not known before in my area of expertise. We have to maintain a baseline of support now, because if it needs to be ramped up, it can't be ramped up from less than a baseline. It needs to have at least a baseline. And the current environment, as General Swan mentioned earlier, is of concern, because we know there's a shift in how we are looking at funding and resourcing. And without those resources and the funding available, programs will not take place, or they'll be folded. And that's the baseline that I say that is really important to meet. We have to have a policy that's nimble, that can be rapidly ramped up to meet whatever the current needs are. And one of the things we learned in this conflict was the mental health needs of our service members and their families. And we were not really prepared from the family support arena to see how can we be on the prevention side of some of these issues. And so it took a while to ramp up Military One Source and the non-medical counseling for military families. But it's there now, and we need to maintain it. One of the lessons learned that I would like to see, I always say if I would be queen for the day, is that our military chain of command needs to deeply understand that family readiness is mission readiness. And until that really is embedded into their lexicon, we're going to see family support as low-hanging fruit that can be just cut off and not needed. And that's really an area of concern that I feel need to be pressing that information forward. They need to be accountable. They need to be accountable of knowing what the programs are, what the research tells us, and how they can make sure that their troops and their families are accessing those resources. Why have the resources if nobody uses them? And one of the other, I thought, really highlights that I took away from reading the book was in Chapter 5. And they use the term shareholders versus stakeholders. And what that means is that it conveys ownership of more than interest in military families. And so I think we need to start using that term as we talk about all of the people who are sitting in this room, that we're shareholders in this space, that we care about military families and veteran families, and we're going to do something about that. We need to establish a system of ongoing professional development for our family support people, both within the DoD as well as outside the DoD, because they are going to be on the front line of providing the services and meeting the needs of those families. And if they do not have a deep understanding of what those challenges are and how to communicate with military families, they're not going to be successful. And then I think the other issue is an ongoing one. One of the things in the chapter that I tried to document was the number of task forces and convenings and get-togethers that we have that we needed to have. We know the information. We know that families are not aware of the resources, but what are we going to do about it? This is why the battle plan is practical, where we're going to come up with courses of action to make sure that they are aware of the resources that are available to them. And I think the last point I would like to leave is that one of the things we learned is that special populations rise to a level of intense support. So we need to be ready for that. And I think looking at the mental health challenges, the medical challenges, facing service members and their families, regardless of their age, is something that we need to continue to really hone in on. So I'll pass it on to Will.
My name tag over. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the perspective. As Shelley mentioned, I spent 10 years on Capitol Hill, almost all of them with the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, and was there, excuse me, from 1997 until 2007, so sort of pre-war, pre-9/11 and after. And I guess I would say a couple things. One, my chapter was mostly focused on what advocates can do to push Congress to do the right thing the next time we need it done. In some ways, that has to start now. And I think in reflecting this morning, or I guess yesterday, on what I was going to talk about this morning, I was sort of asking myself if anything has been done yet in the wake of both the book and then sort of the follow-on from heavy deployment. And I think the good news is yes. And I'm going to sort of, I'll say, demonstrate or prove that my involvement to some degree in the failings of the Hill to manage well the issues related to battlefield deployment started with Ted Wade. Some of you may know Ted or have met him over the years. He was then an Army sergeant who was injured in an improvised explosive device. And in essence, I'll make the long story short, he was discharged from the military, from the Army, in a coma, and sent to VA nursing home in Richmond, Virginia, where his roommate was 87 and recovering from a stroke. That's all the VA had. The military did not know what to do with Ted. They too were in some ways unprepared to deal with, and I don't mean this crassly, but what do we do with a soldier who's no longer good to us? We don't know what to do with Ted. And Ted became sort of a metaphor for all of it. The problem was the military didn't know what to do with Ted, and the VA didn't know how to treat Ted. It truly did not have a population of young, grievously wounded service members who were surviving battlefield injury in incredibly high rates. And so, in some ways, both systems dealt with them the way they knew how. Not my problem. The VA was built for this. You go do it. And the VA said, okay, we'll do it, and we'll do it like we treat everybody else. Literally, we're going to put them in a warehouse. That's sort of what happened. And that whole thing, by the way, I should add that one of the biggest challenges is that Ted's wife, Sarah, at the time in the Army, right, she had base housing allowance, a salary that came with Ted's job, TRICARE, actual medical care services. They discharged Ted from the Army, gone, all of it. No VA disability comp was ready to be paid. There wasn't this disability retirement system. There was, but it wasn't ready to handle the number of injuries and challenges that these service members faced. And so, in some bizarre way, Sarah wound up destitute from the fact that her husband was so severely injured. And at the end of the day, I think what I would look back on and say is Congress is divided up into obviously 535 members, but it's over 180 committees and subcommittees that manage little aspects of public policy. Each looks at a problem from the perspective of its own committee's jurisdiction or what power it has. For example, to an appropriations committee member, everything can be solved with money. Just give it money, and you will solve a problem. Sometimes that's the worst thing you can do, but it doesn't matter. They do it. And so when you kind of think about that, I started to look and say, part of the problem is VA and DOD being separate systems in and of themselves created separate philosophies and interests in how to solve the challenges of seriously wounded service members and their family challenges. And neither one, Armed Services, VA, neither one really knew how to do it. But reflecting back on it and cutting to the chase on what advocates, the population, shareholders, I like that, by the way, what shareholders can and should do on a go-forward basis, from my perspective, we ought to make it very clear at the outset, and I think we largely have, the military should be responsible for seriously wounded service members or wounded service members and their families for a good period of time after sustainment of an injury. When I say good period, I mean 2 to 5 years. A couple reasons for that. One, it's going to take time and the support structure the military provides in order to transition through that challenge. The injury itself is shocking, but so too are all the other machinations that come along with that, the medical care, the need to switch jobs, caregiver assistance, et cetera. The second reason the military ought to do it is because they are nimble enough to do it. They're used to moving at that kind of speed with hundreds of thousands of people and quite candidly, command and control capability. Go put something over there and care for those people. And there are thousands of people that move when somebody says that in the military. It doesn't work in the VA. I wish I could tell you it does. It doesn't. So that would be sort of my second. The third is they have the money. That's just pure and simple. It takes a ton of resources to handle the serious injuries of war and the family challenges that go along with it. DOD has the money, and quite frankly, at a time of conflict, they get more of it. The public supports it overwhelmingly. Congress is prepared to provide it. They don't ask a lot of questions, and they trust the military to manage it to the best of their ability. Do they always? No. But generally, they do a good job. And so they'll get the money. And finally, and I think this is the most important part, the military is permitted to fail. I know those of you in the military that have failed in the past may not see it that way, but there is a lot of trial and error permitted by Congress and the public in the military. They're allowed to research, attempt to develop new weapons, new flying objects, new boats, to do new things. They try new research. They spend a lot of money on things that never work, but that's okay. That's what makes us the most innovative, lethal force on the earth. We try lots of things and fail. Difficult situations require the permission to do that. And so you need nimbleness, you need money, and you need tolerance to fail in order to deal with what I'll call the exigencies of war. And I think advocates, shareholders would do well to remind Congress, to go at Congress in the future to say, bear in mind, this will be a defense problem. Organize yourselves around the ability to do it. I'll close with the idea that I do think there has been some progress. I'll point to two things that I think are hugely important to whether VA, if asked to do it, if what I say turns out not to be the course that's taken, if VA is asked to do it and manage injured service members and family members quickly following a large deployment in the future, they've done two things I think they're well. One, they've focused a lot of attention on caregivers. How do we support family members? And they've broadened the definition of caregivers and family members pretty wide. Places that 10, 12 years ago I didn't think Congress would ever go. And they've gone there now, and I think it's a good thing. But they've really begun to try to figure out how to support the network of family members it takes to render care and treatment and service to severely injured service members. They support them now with at least some resources, financial and otherwise, give them tools, teach them how to manage some of these challenges with activities of daily living, et cetera. Is it far enough? No. I don't think it is. I do not think the VA is the system that catches the family that serves, right? I can remember saying and writing in the book, you know, individuals enlist to serve, families actually serve. And that's true. And I give the military a lot of credit for recognizing that way before the war. I mean, they started designing benefits, housing, and education and healthcare that were designed to attract and retain families into the service because that was the reality. The VA is not there yet. They're closer, but they're not there. The second thing they've done is they have begun to build a community care capability in VA, relying on the private sector to deliver some portion of its healthcare services. That's important for a lot of reasons. Full disclosure, we talked about conflicts of interest. I work for Express Scripts. We have a contract to run the TRICARE pharmacy program. We are part of that solution as it pertains to the military. But I happen to believe it's a good thing all around, and VA should do a little more of it. And the reason is it creates incredible flexibility. When 9/11 happened and the military deployed a substantial number of its actual medical providers into theater, there was a massive network of private sector relationships to care for family members, service members, and the like left in the community to do it. They didn't have to be at an MTF to do it. They had developed, they being the military and Congress, a system to pick up those extra pieces. When VA was called upon to care for previously wounded service members, they weren't prepared for that. They were all maxed out. They were downsizing. And they had few relationships to help them expand their capabilities without building new buildings. And that created a huge problem, both the technological capability to treat these severely wounded service members and the relationships to pay for them. They just didn't have it. So they have started that, and I think that's a good thing. It will provide a wider net of capabilities, both from a facilities perspective and from a skill set. The hardest thing military families faced was the complexity of these injuries, and neither the DoD nor VA was capable of it, frankly. People wound up in Chicago's trauma centers to try to help these young men and women because they knew how to do it. So I'll close with that, but I think if advocates, shareholders could focus more attention on trying to convince Congress, make a decision on who's in charge, commit to it for a period of time, and fund it while the VA prepares for what's coming, you'll wind up with a better outcome. The willy-nilly way we went about handling Ted Wade, can't do that again. Thanks.
So good morning. It's my pleasure to talk about Chapter 8 in the book. And I think I'm going to be very complimentary of the chapter, so I think it's very important at the outset that I point out that I'm a co-author and not the sole author of Chapter 8, which I think is part of the power of this contribution to the handbook. We had representatives from First Data Corporation, a couple of consultants working closely with the Society of Human Resource Management, plus myself working in the talent acquisition field since 1999, so right through 9/11 and up until today. So I think it merges multiple perspectives and makes it a very rich chapter. And essentially, it deals with the response of corporate America to the veteran unemployment challenge that started to occur a few years after 9/11, as we started to see servicemen and women come back, be discharged into one of the deepest recessions that we've had on record, into an environment that wasn't prepared to put them back to work, and didn't really have a lot of the mechanisms in place in order to foster their success in what comes next in their careers. And I think what our chapter provides is a case study of success, of how a national dialogue was created across the country and across corporate America on what to do about veteran unemployment. There was a sense that this is unacceptable. We can't have these troops that have gone forward and fought for the country coming back in various conditions and not have a job for them and their families to build the rest of their lives professionally. And it also details in I think, great specifics the kind of partnerships that were formed across various entities. And I think this is really unique in the response of corporate America. It was the public sector joining the private sector, joining the government sector, and academia as well, and all of them working together to form new institutions or new ways of work in order to solve the veteran unemployment challenge. So examples on the public side, corporations came together in organizations like the Veteran Job Mission, which is over 200 major corporations focused on hiring veterans and military families. Companies that were competitors. My company, Comcast, is a very significant competitor with Disney, but when it came to this space, it wasn't a question. It was, what can we do together to try to solve this challenge? And entities like the Veteran Jobs Mission helped create those dialogues. It still exists today. Just had a meeting 2 weeks ago, so that continues on. Private sector, we saw things like Hiring Our Heroes coming out of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. Again, bringing together government resources, veteran service organizations, and corporations, running job fairs across the country, both face-to-face and in person, for veterans, spouses, and those continue today, but really were a significant response in the 2012-2013 timeframe to say, how can we come together and put no-cost events across the country in military communities to try to help solve this unemployment challenge. The government, things like joining forces, which came out of the White House as an attempt, again, to bridge the corporate and the government sector to make an impact on veterans. And then different legislations like work opportunity tax credits that were provided to companies. Nothing incents an organization to do something more in the talent space than if there's a tax advantage to doing it. And so by providing that kind of support, that helped jumpstart some of the corporations in their efforts. And on the academic side, certainly we're sitting here as part of the MFRI, Syracuse University and their Institute of Veteran and Military Affairs would be another example, as research started to swing in and say, what does that bring to the mix? But I think this partnership across all these entities working together for a singular mission is something that's unique. And in my opinion, this chapter in the book is the best comprehensive history of that journey that I've read. And it really takes you through step by step in almost a case study way. So what are some of the outcomes that came out of this partnership, both ones that happened in the past and are continuing on today? The rise of things like employee resource groups within corporations or affinity groups, veterans networks, and then expanding those not just to veterans but to military families, but those becoming real support entities in major corporations to help navigate, onboard, retain veterans. That's pretty much a industry standard now for a major corporation, is to have an employee resource group specifically around veterans. Changes to government services and policies. We talked a little bit about VA earlier, but the transition program going from TAP to GPS transition, significant, made it better. It's not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction, making that more valuable, making it more aligned with equipping transitioning service members with the ability to present themselves and their resume in a way that corporations can understand what skills they bring and how they could fit into the organization. Skills translation. So a lot of time at the outset was saying, well, what can this person do? They were an infantryman in the Army. What could they do in my company? And so it started out with things like skills translator, which are very blunt instruments. You put in your military occupational specialty and it spits out a job. Somewhat helpful, at least gives you an idea. But it's really things like the ERGs that helped put veterans in front of those resumes to say, this is what that person could do. Or telling veteran stories. How did you transition? How did you get this job? And showing that this is what a cryptologic warfare officer looks like in a human resources capacity. Those do not seem like complementary disciplines in any way, shape, or form. But if I tell my story and other veterans share their story, it helps make those connections in terms of skills transferred. And essentially, we solved the veteran unemployment problem. Now, it wasn't singularly these partnerships and these initiatives. The economy is in a very different situation today than it was back then. But for the most part, the dialogue is shifting, and it's no longer around the disparity between the unemployment rate of veterans and the unemployment rate of the population at large. I will say, however, significant opportunity remains in the military spouse population. And that is a chronically underemployed, fantastic talent resource that we're starting to see more and more efforts towards that. In my company, in Comcast, we have a specific program targeting military spouses where we offer portable jobs, work-from-home options in customer service. And if somebody PCSs as part of a military move and we're not able to align a job for that spouse in our company, we have a severance package and transition aid to help them on to what's next. So I am encouraged that there'll continue to be increasing energy in that space. So what's new in the space today? What does the dialogue look like in the veteran employment, veteran talent area? So one, obviously, I mentioned a couple times, the economy is different. It's the exact opposite of how it was in 2011, 2012, 2013. There's more jobs than there are people for those jobs. So that's a really unique opportunity, I think, for companies to enter that maybe haven't been in the veteran talent space before, to look and see who's been successful. I'll give an example of T-Mobile. Not a name that was coming up in 2012, 2013, 2014. Today, they're running national advertising campaigns, and they're really leaning into the veteran space. So new entrants, seeing how it worked for other companies and trying to bring those or bring their company along to access that, that talent as well. Seeing new organizations or former organizations become more visible. I'll give an example of Student Veterans of America. I think that singularly is transforming how transitioning veterans leverage their GI Bill benefits and then how they position themselves for success on campus. Student veterans are a remarkable talent population. You're bringing someone who's more mature, has had those experiences in the military for several years, is now getting a degree with all the latest training, and then is ready with reasonable salary expectations to enter the workforce. And you're getting someone that's in a different spot than your typical undergrad. And Student Vets of America is really helping veterans make better choices. leveraging research, they show the difference that it makes in picking the right school, the right major, and the right opportunity. And there's a lot of noise out there in terms of different colleges and programs that are vying for that GI Bill benefits, and they don't always act in the best interest of the veteran. And so I think the better choices that student veterans, transitioning veterans make, the better outcomes they will have, and the better source of talent they'll be for corporate America. There's also a group like Service to Schools, which is an up-and-coming veteran service organization that's focused on veterans attending top-tier schools. Schools like Purdue, I'll put that plug in.
Thank you.
But, you know, across the board, really saying you can go to Harvard, you can go to Princeton, Ivy League, MIT. Those are real options, and they're helping the schools be open to that talent and really fostering those pathways. And I think that has a significant opportunity to shape the space. We're also seeing things like, we talked a little bit about the Guard and Reserve. That's becoming even more critical part of the strategy. The Guard has just gone to a higher operations tempo recently within the last several months, and they're asked to do even more. And so the challenge of companies supporting their employees who are reservists is a real one. So great organizations like ESGR and what they're doing to help educate employers, and again, encouraging reservists to tell their stories. You know, how have I made a 27-year career in the Navy work with a job in a Fortune 50 organization? How was I able to become a vice president at Comcast in the same year that I became a captain in the Navy Reserve? I say that less about me. I say that more for an example of how you can navigate those two careers and be able to make that work. You have to give those soldiers and sailors and guardsmen those vision of success and understand how they can do it, and then companies that vision of success. So in closing, what are some of the takeaways from our chapter that live on in terms of how to think about this challenge for next time? So one of the, I think, premier findings out of our chapter, or recommendations rather, was the best way to be ready for next time is to continue to talk about this, and it was recommended that tabletop exercises are a way to do that. Borrowed it from business contingency planning, where you bring all the various parties together and you sit in a room and you throw a scenario on the table, and then you work to crowdsource the answers. How would you approach it? Create that tension, that creative tension in the room, and force people beyond their comfort level to actually grapple with the problem in a simulated way. And so that recommendation was made in 2015. When I look at what the agenda holds for today, we're going to do some tabletop exercises. So it's terrific to see that recommendation put in practice. And I think even beyond the formality of this organization, you know, veteran ERGs can support that in their companies. Maybe it's a tabletop on how do we bring reservists back in, how do we do a better job with bringing spouses in, how do we crowdsource all that knowledge that's out there. But I think that's a winning strategy. I'm excited to be part of testing it today. I think the second is looking at the situation like an arc and recognizing there's going to be transition points. So what you're doing today will change as you mature in your strategy. And so on the corporate side, you know, it started out around veteran employment, and then it started to expand a little bit. What about spouses? Then it started to go beyond that. Well, what about retention? It doesn't do us any good to bring them in if they turn over within a year and they're not adding value. And then we started to see the impact to caregivers. So what is the role of a company to support caregivers? And then Guard and Reserve. And so what started as the initial challenge is going to change over time. As you knock down some challenges, others will arise, and you have to have that flexibility, I believe, in your strategy to recognize that it's going to adapt, it's going to mature, and it's going to take on more as it goes through time. And so I think recognizing that at the outset is healthy. And then third, this idea of how do you create this national dialogue? How do you unite across multiple sectors behind a very simple goal? In this instance, it was veteran unemployment, very compelling. It was quantitative, you see the numbers. So how do you tie the next challenge, no matter what it is, to something that everybody can sign up for? that you engender that sea of goodwill across all of these different entities and work together. I think that was the real power of what was done and what was captured in Chapter 8, and I think that's the real opportunity for next time, because if you can bring this level of attention across all of these sectors, amazing things can happen, and that's our recommendation out of the chapter. So thank you for your interest, and it was a real honor and pleasure to be part of this book. Thank you, Shelley.
So I'm going to talk about just the arc of the book itself, and also I'd like to thank Michael Gravens for being my co-author in the chapter about nonprofits. But honestly, we're all in the people business, and when you look at the title, Shelley, as always, is brilliantly laid out. We're looking at this plan, but it's still very people-centered. So battle plan can sound like it's not about the people, but it's about the event, and it's really not. And what the tiny words at the top talks about risk and resilience, and that's how do you balance that? So I want, I'm a teacher, so I want y'all to write these words down, and I am looking if you write the words down. So I want you, I'm looking. And Bill knows that I do grade your papers. So I want you to write Steve Jobs, pancakes, Dora the Explorer, The Martian, and Mr. Rogers. So that's how I'm going to talk to you. And then we'll go back and you can check and grade my paper and see if I talked about it. So Walter Isaacson talks about innovators and people who can just push the envelope. And he talks about Steve Jobs and he talks about Leonardo da Vinci. But what he is really talking about is people who were willing to see something that the rest of us weren't ready to see yet. But by taking knowledge that other people had worked on and pulling it forward. I'm not saying Steve Jobs was a nice person. I would not have wanted him in my third grade classroom. He would have been in the hall. But nevertheless, if you read his book, he brought in other people. He didn't just want the engineers. Why in the world do they make remote controls the way they make remote controls? Or microwaves the way they make microwaves? They don't all work the same way. It's because they let engineers think about it and not how people work. And that was the same way with Leonardo da Vinci. Unfortunately, he was a little ADD, ADHD, but once he thought about an idea, then he was kind of ready to move on. So the joy of creativity. So what I would ask is we stop using the word space so much. We do use it a lot, but it's not about the mission. Isn't that what we're about? We're about mission, not about spaces. We're about people and not about spaces. So I hope y'all can understand my Texas accent. I tried to say that with great passion at a White Oak meeting, and they thought I was saying to stop using Spanx. Now, I am not opposed to Spanx. I'm a believer, but I'm saying please let's talk about mission. The military talks about mission. Why are we afraid to talk about that? We're about being person-centered, about thinking about people. And that's really what I think the arc of the book is about, and what lessons can we learn from that. So how I think the book takes apart from different perspectives, just like Steve Jobs or Leonardo da Vinci, how do we look at things differently? If we're dissecting the I, or we're thinking about a new way that people can communicate. We think about what is the problem, the issue, or the opportunity. And then what are the patterns that are out there? What do we know in the past? What stories are people telling about it? And how do we pull it forward? So there's a really good article in Forbes magazine that I was really struck by, and it talks about minding the expectation gap. And I think that's part of the patterns and the practices that are out there. So people have this expectation. Now, I do think that's the downside, Barbara, and I know Barbara and I have talked about this a lot. When there was, intensive work and a lot of money and a lot of programs, then there's an expectation. So to a certain extent, it was like, wow. So this expectation builds this story that you're going to take care of me. Well, back to this balance of risk and resilience, what you really want is for people to have the capacity, right, to take care of themselves, and that's how I'm getting to pancakes. You were wondering about that. So, like I said, people tell these stories. So I have a lot of grandchildren, and, my children now are telling me stories of things they did in high school that I'm really glad I did not know about that when they were in high school. But they've turned out fine in spite of me. So recently, my son and my 9-year-old granddaughter and I were talking about pancakes. And my son said, well, you remember this story I told you about Grammy and her pancakes. And my 9-year-old granddaughter said, how did you make such terrible pancakes, Grammy? And I was like, I don't remember making terrible pancakes. But my son said, how did you manage to burn the outside of the pancake? And the middle of the pancake was always raw. Now, I don't have this memory. They do. So my son was saying, that he makes the perfect pancakes. So then my 9-year-old granddaughter was saying, well, how did that happen? I said, well, I think it was a science experiment. So, we had this discussion. But her pancake expectation was different than my son's pancake expectation. So now he's told this story that I was a poor pancake maker, which I don't believe. But that was the past, right? She's now thinking of a future story. She's thinking and remembering of her dad and making pancakes, right? And so she's bringing that story forward. So what I'm saying is this is about a dynamic trajectory of people bringing their own expectations and their own stories to play. Now, y'all are thinking about your own pancakes, and bless your heart. But that's how things get captured. These little stories happen along the way. It's about the user experience that we've learned from technology. You have to think about the user and not about the program. And it's pretty easy, and I'm talking about my organization or any organization, when you think, here's a problem, we're going to solve it, we're going to fix it, this is the way it is, without thinking, what does this mean for the person? Unfortunately, it can mean throwing out things that for some people work, but if we don't have good patterns and we haven't captured stories of users as well as data along the way, and what motivated us to get there. So it's important even in the organization to say, no, we built that then because, not that it may be useful forever, but it was important then. We may not have always known, what we needed to do, but we knew we had to do something. But that also means having the guts to challenge stuff and to say, do we need to keep doing that? Do we need to sunset it? Do we need to ask people to prove that what they're doing is good work? So that means an inside and outside rigor. Are we sure this is right? What again is that user experience? What is the mission, not the space? What is the experience, and can we pause it? And then can we think, is this the best way to do this now? Or do we need to deconstruct it and say, this really worked? This really worked. Now, back to the expectation gap. People are doing so many things now because they can do it on their own. And that is if you're getting a car or you're saying, I want to, TripAdvisor owns Airbnb, or, Bill and I were talking about how, Aetna and CVS are coming together because people want clinics that are closer. I mean, people are saying, look, I'm going to demand this as the customer. And we can't just expect to build these big giant programs or to think that just because we needed to do things a certain way, that's going to always work. It may still work for some people because you have to pay attention to the demographic. So, that's the inside-outside rigor. And that means challenging it in the organizations as well as outside. Inside our organization, they're always kind of hating on me because I'm saying, get to the best yes. Okay, is that best yes for you or for the customer, for the shareholder? And thank you, Barbara, for bringing that up. That goes to Dora the Explorer. So I don't know if you ever watched Dora the Explorer, but if you haven't, I think that would be a good professional development opportunity, except she hangs around with a blue monkey, which is a little odd. But Dora frequently has these challenges, and she doesn't break down and she doesn't cry, but somebody that's her friend reminds her that she has a map, and the map is in her backpack. That's why the battle plan is important. It's when you get stressed that you got to go back. You know, it's when you have to remember, wait a second, I can do this, I can do this. That's the difference between resilience and thriving. So to me, resilience is you built the plan, you know somebody that helped it, but thriving is using it and saying, no, wait a second, I already know how to do this. Or, you know what, I can call on Will. He knows how to do this. I don't have to know everything. That's the backpack. But it's also your friends reminding you that you've done it before, And that's why the plan is important. Absolutely, nimbleness is important. But so is trust, and so is being responsible. So nimbleness doesn't mean just giving everything up. It means saying, wait a second, what are our core values? You know, what do we believe? Beyond that, we will not go. For nonprofits, you know, and then when I was an area superintendent, it was true for us in school business, you had to be careful where you didn't get diverted into things that really weren't your cause, because it attenuates your energy. You can't be all things to all people. I know your mother's told you this, she was right. You know, you just cannot do that. If you do, you can't be anything to anybody at any time. You have to go, wait a minute, we're not doing this, but NMFA is. Wait a minute, we're not doing this, but, you know, Purdue is doing this. How can we call and how can we be our best to take care of other people for the mission? How can we ask Patty Barron what her wisdom is? You know, we don't have to know all of this, but that's why the relationships matter. So, again, you have to come from a core of trust and paying attention to little stuff. To me, it's really important to read and listen and to pay attention to things that are not part of what we do. So, what are businesses doing? What's technology doing? What can I see on the stock market? Why are people doing this? You know, my brother I was telling Erica, is a wealth manager. You know, I am completely not that. How we could come from the same family beats me. But, you know, he thinks about things I don't think about. And that helps stretch us, you know, helps us think broader. So paying attention to patterns. And that means paying attention to data. And I know it seems boring, but we have to track it. For us in our organization, we track what the customers say. And we keep track of it with a scorecard. And we ask, what is it? You know, we think we're great, but honestly, other people might not have thought we were great. So where are we missing this? And you have to kind of pay attention to the drama. You know, what's going on? I mean, even if it's one or two stories. And I'm thinking about with NMFA, because I'm on the Military Family Readiness Council, and both of us were seeing a lot of drama around parents who took their kids to behavioral health, and it was in their record that they were depressed or whatever. And by the way, lots of diagnoses are not correct, and nobody goes back and verifies it. But now it's in their record that this kid was depressed and they were 12. How many 6th or 7th graders do you know that aren't just a little bit anxious or a little bit depressed? But the parent was doing the right thing, and they took them for behavioral health. Now it's in the record. Now that child is 20 or 21 and wants to join the military. And guess what? That behavioral health problem is in their record. And so that means they may have some problems joining the military. With NMFA, we both worked hard to make it a priority. The drama mattered. That one story surely has other parts to it. But what it was the core with the data that turned out to be the definition of how people were interpreting things that weren't current. So that means, are our assumptions right? Do we have to challenge the assumption? And I think that means pushing hard against it, which goes to the movie The Martian. I love that movie, The Martian. I just love it. So here's why I brought that up. At the very end, and first of all, it just scares me to death. Could y'all imagine being abandoned on Mars? First of all, I would never be getting in that ever want to go to Mars by myself. But anyway, or even with other people, I go, are you kidding me? I'm not doing this. I'm worried about going to the airport. I'm not doing this, you know? So he ends up by himself anyway, and then instead of panicking, which of course I would do and die within about 10 minutes, you know, he says, do the math. Do the math. What do I already know? What are my assets? Goes back to risk, resilience, and thriving. So in the movie The Martian, he does everything he can himself, but then it doesn't work. He has a catastrophe, and that's what Shelley wants us to work toward. What happens when everything falls apart? But you know what? Then he was able to communicate back home, and they were able to help him through. Then when he made it back, thank goodness, then he was able to teach other people about that experience. Which then goes to the movie, or to the story, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. It's neighborhood. And that's about creativity, surprises, and gratitude. That's about teaching each other and valuing each other. It's not about a space. Mr. Rogers never talked about a space. He talked about heart. He talked about inclusivity. He talked about gratitude. So that's what I think that Shelley has given us, this wonderful opportunity together to invite us to their neighborhoods so that when something happens, like Dora, we've got a plan in our backpack.
Thank you, Mary. Can we express our appreciation? I'm going to call an audible here. We're coming up to a break time, and I want to allow a few minutes for you in the room to ask questions. Then we're going to take a break. I'm going to ask the panelists to come back up because I have a few questions I want to ask you that will be a transition into our next activity. But before we break, let's just spend a couple of minutes. Are there people in the room who would like to ask a question? I can't see who it, Ray, please. Ray Weeks has a question. Oh, wait, there's a microphone coming. There you go. Thank you.
Thanks all panelists for that insightful look at the various chapters and for contributing, Will and others who've done that, so thank you for that. I have two different questions for two different panelists. Will, and I think you and I might have had this discussion back in April when we were in Lafayette, and this is relative to sort of the coalition of the willing. You know, you mentioned T-Mobile now, but I had a sense as I left the space, pardon me, Mary, the mission of veteran employment transition and supporting those groups, that as the war, I don't want to say winding down, but in effect was, you and I had talked about sort of the seemingly to fall off in terms of the general spirit of cooperation, or at least in terms of getting together. But I just want to note that and ask how you felt too about the fact that the joining forces initiative went away, regardless of what we think of the politics of the administration. Did that have an effect on, if you will, sort of the gathering of eagles over the course of time? Your thoughts on that, and kind of where are we now relative to the spirit of cooperation? I'll end with just a note that, is it because corporations like the Comcast and Express Scripts and others have institutionalized or operationalized the notion that there is a good business reason to be in the veteran talent space or not? I know that's sort of loaded. And then I just had a question for Mary on the nonprofit side, that I thought might be interesting to the group, is why do you think that there isn't at least more visible cooperation among nonprofits who seem to have similar missions? Why isn't there some gathering, if you will, or getting together on those fronts? Thank you.
So I do think what they refer to is this receding tide of the sea of goodwill when it comes to veteran hiring. And it was certainly at its height, as you can see in our chapter, when there was this national dialogue around veteran recruiting. So some of that visibility has tapered off. But where I think we're left with is leading companies have recognized what the real opportunity is with the veteran population, student veterans, military spouses, And now it's becoming part of a company's individual competitive advantage if they're able to harness this effectively for their talent agenda. As I sit in talent acquisition, what are the things that I'm thinking about? I'm thinking about the rise of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and is my workforce able to upskill in order to be able to operate with the direction that things are going from a technology perspective. I think about our brand broadly, our value proposition, retention. And so veterans are a key part of this because they work. And you start to see things happening, not to make a political statement here, but it was mentioned recently that both political parties are eagerly seeking veterans to run them in political races. And I don't think they'd be doing that if they didn't think that veterans would be a competitive advantage for them in terms of what they bring, their attributes, their skills, their experience, and tapping into that sea of goodwill that the nation generally has for people that have served or are serving. So, you know, the bandwagon may not be as loud right now, but we still are seeing the companies that are good at this continuing to expand. We at Comcast just announced a new commitment last week to hire 21,000 veterans by 2021. Most recently, we hired 10,000 between 2015 and 2018. So it continues for us. Amazon building HQ2. And from what I'm hearing, this area right where we're sitting today could be a part of that plan. And I can't help but think, knowing how they are active and leaders in the military space, that veteran talent, military spouses, looking at the demographic of this particular location in the U.S. is a huge opportunity for them, and they'll be all over that. And I think that's going to open up thousands of opportunities for the veteran space. So I do agree it may not be as loud right now, but I think you always are concerned that does change last and does it stick? And I think it's now over to the ERGs, it's over to the talent acquisition departments that get it, and it's people that are looking out and seeing what other companies are doing and how they're having success, and then them wanting to tap into it as well.
So nonprofits have, you know, there's lots of different roles and diversities, and you know, that are in the nonprofit community. So I think, you know, what we're the Military Child Education Coalition, so we focus obviously on children and families. So sometimes we have collaborations that are, you know, long term because it just makes sense for us. You know, and we've been around 21 years, so you know, we know who's you know, the one that, you know, we can partner with, like on the long term for something, or collaborate in a community of practice. But there's other opportunities that just pop up, and that's good too. You know, something comes up and you want to know what perhaps someone's doing in the higher ed initiatives, like Student Veterans of America, for example. And we may not take the lead on something like Carrie Wofford just, you know, has really done a lot around the higher education policy and student loans and issues there, and people that are pirates that, you know, prey on post 9/11 GI Bill. We're not taking the lead, they are. So you respect them and you say, how can we support what someone else is taking point on? So I think that it can look like, everybody's doing all these things that are similar, but really there's opportunities for paths to converge, or that, you know, you stay constantly connected with each other and you're sharing ideas back and forth, or looking for ways to support someone's initiative. So I think what I want to tell you is it's complex and dynamic, but the most important thing is to have great relationships, you know, that go over time. I mean, for us, we work a lot too with the education nonprofit entities, but we're not really working with the healthcare nonprofit entities as much, just because it's kind of the nature of what we do. But we know other people who might reach out more on the healthcare nonprofit side. So you've got, like I said, it's more fluid, and some things are consistent and some things aren't. We actually do meet together quite a bit. Now, personally, I think there's a downside of that, is because we can talk to each other so much we're not talking to other people, and I think that that kind of tampers down your creativity, and it would be cool if we said, okay, we're all going to meet together again, but we all have to bring somebody to the party who's completely different, and then you're getting some new ideas, into the conversations. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Okay, I hope everybody managed to get some more coffee, get some refreshments. I've been trying to stay away from that granola. It looks really good. Okay, so now we're going to enter our second phase of the day, and we will do a little bit of table rearranging when we transition to the working task, but you don't have to worry about that right this second. I want to ask the panelists just a couple of questions to kind of transition into our next task. I do want to say one thing, though. I want to be very clear with everyone who's here that today's event is not about selling books. I just want to be really clear about that. Today's event is about promoting the work of the leaders who did this work. And so it's true, you can buy a book. You can buy a chapter if you want. But if you don't want to do that, then keep an eye out for the one-pagers or the short documents that Barbara is going to be producing with us that will be available for free and distributed widely. We've been doing a variety of presentations about lessons that leaders shared as part of their work and trying to share those out more widely. So Barbara has been doing presentations, I've been doing presentations, other authors have been doing presentations. So there are many ways to learn from these leaders without having to buy a book. I just want to be very overt about that. Now, in terms of questions, we talked with the speakers in advance about things that it might make sense for us to ask, but here again, I'm going to call a little bit of an audible and ask some questions that are specifically aimed at focusing some of the work and thinking of the organizations that are represented in the room. So I'm going to start with Barbara. And you talked about how policy changes systems. And I think for many people, when they think about policy, they think about federal legislation, maybe, or state legislation. They might also think about Department of Defense instructions. But I think you were also thinking about other kinds of policies. And so when you think about in the room, we have corporations and nonprofits and advocacy groups. What kinds of policies do you think they ought to be thinking about now as they try to prepare for some unknown future?
So I think what's important is, like Will said, is, how do we institutionalize some of the success stories that we've had with military support? And when it's institutionalized, that means it's in policy. It means that there's somebody that will continue implementing the program or the requirements after I'm gone or after you're gone. And I think that's what's really important, is that the policies we need to think about are, how do we support unemployment for veterans and for spouses? How do we support children's school transitions? How do we support ensuring that there are behavioral health programs geared to supporting family members, not just the service members? So those kinds of things to be put into policies that make an organization recognize that this is something that's on their to-do list and something that they are going to be held accountable for. I think when I look at my career, especially in early childhood, it was those policies that were placed from the Military Child Care Act that transformed the military child development system. And if we did not have those policies, we would not have achieved national accreditation of over 98% of our programs versus the civilian sector. And so that's when I say it changes systems. It gives you the roadmap of what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to do it, but it also makes you accountable to an oversight body that you are doing what your organization has decided, whether it's through legislation or it's through following trends and research, knowing that what is good for military families is put into place, and that it's there in written form that somebody is going to say, what are you doing about this? I mean, I can remember, we had a lot of changes in our organization over time, and, I had different programs fall into my portfolio. Well, in order for me to learn about that program, I had to read their policy and then question, what are you doing about it? And I remember one particular program, they weren't following the policy. It was like, well, why do you have it in policy if you're not going to do something about it? And so, we started a committee because it was required by policy. And all of a sudden, we started to have shareholders in this space be held accountable for things that were going on with families with special needs. And so it's that kind of an approach that I really feel that that while it's not fun, especially in the Department of Defense, to develop a policy and finally get it signed out, it takes years, but it's something that is lasting, and I think that's what's important.
Thank you. Jason Vale from the American Bar Association gave an example that I have always really liked, which is that their association actually has a contingency policy, essentially, where they can fast track policy changes in times of war or in urgent times. And so they were able to design and implement and get approved some innovations during the conflict that were kind of rapidly arising needs. So they had a policy mechanism, if you will, for making new policy that they could fast track. And I thought that was a very creative innovation in a nonprofit. Billy, you made a very specific proposal about DoD maintaining responsibility for wounded folks for a prolonged period of time to try to cover that what has always been, or at least for my lifetime in doing military work, recognized as an awkward and challenging transition. So there are lots of organizations represented in the room. Many of them engage in advocacy work. I'm not aware that there's a consensus about, your proposal, or that that's a really high priority kind of idea. So what would be your sort of wish list for organizations that are here or other organizations about what they should be doing right now, right in this political moment, or perhaps in January when our new class of Congress people takes their seats? What would you like organizations to do?
I mean, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously. Some of this probably needs to start by convincing the Department of Defense they should do it. Although not necessarily. If they were to buy that theory, i.e., yeah, we should be in charge for 2 years following a traumatic injury, it would certainly help Congress come along quite easily. They would probably rally around that notion. If that doesn't happen, I do think the best way to start that conversation every year comes with the budget. Every year the budget is submitted, the committees in Congress pose, when I tell you hundreds, it's hundreds of questions to the agencies about their budget. Those questions all get answered. Believe it or not, Barbara probably has answered hundreds of them herself, right? They tend to start to shape conversations inside the building. They're why staff get powerful on the Hill, because they can write letters. The letters get vetted out into the agencies, and they get answered. And the answers sometimes require discussion, development. Honestly, the first step is find someone to ask the question. I will say Joyce and I don't want to take up a lot of time, but Joyce and I were talking at the break. I think if we did make this decision as a country that DoD will be in charge for X period of time, there would be a lot of things that would build around that. You would start to see more stable benefit structure decisions. Spouses and families would understand more what would happen to them and to plan for beyond it. Right now, it's sort of a catch as catch can. You're either insured for it or you're not, and it goes on. So, but the first thing I would say is find someone to ask the question, and you will start to shape the group of people inside the agency that will drive the answer.
Thank you. Will, you, when we were talking in advance about things to ask about, one of the things you talked about is what appears to be a return in the geopolitical environment to kind of a competition among big powers, Russia, China, the U.S. Mr. Macron referred to this over the weekend about how we seem to be going back to where we were right before World War I. And so I'm curious about your thoughts, again, for people in the room, the organizations represented in the room as they engage in their discussions. What kinds of things do you think they should be thinking about or talking about to try to make themselves ready for this new geopolitical era?
And no, I had mentioned in my role in talent acquisition, you know, the hottest things are machine learning and AI and upskilling. The military has got some really significant transitional issues that they're wrestling with as well. So one of them is absolutely the great power competition and a return maybe to less of the littoral warfare and expeditionary warfare of the past. We're sending troops back into Germany. We're talking about bases in places like Poland. We're seeing more rotations of troops into Australia throughout the Pacific. So for military families, that's going to bring different challenges. Are those folks that are going forward, will they be coming with dependents in the more traditional former model, or will they be more expeditionary and those dependents will be drawing on stateside architectures? We're also in an environment of immediate communications. And so that link between the service member and the spouse and the family, although there can be thousands of miles and time zones separating things, you are in immediate contact. And so different from in the past, if something significant happens in that family, that service member is aware of it instantaneously. And he or she is wrestling with that during the course of the day or during the course of their operation. And so that's a very significant tether. I even think there's new vulnerabilities in that space. You know, being a cryptologic warfare officer, we think about asymmetrical challenges that could happen. So what if you were forward deployed and your family is victim of a cyber attack and their bank accounts don't show up anymore, or they're not able to, you know, pay their bills, or their identity is stolen? If you do that on a significant scale to military families, it can impact that readiness of those forward deployed troops. So that's, you know, thinking outside of the box, but it would not surprise me if that's the kind of place that we're headed. Some of the other trends we've talked about already, the increased reliance on the Guard and Reserve and the unique challenges with that population, because in many instances that spouse and family doesn't really know that much about the military. They're not located near a base. The service member may or may not have been active duty before, and they don't know how to access those resources, and their surrounding community doesn't embrace them necessarily in the school or in the workplace, unless you've got an ERG and work for a company that is sensitive to that. I also think another big trend is the changing demographics of the military in terms of women. Roles on submarines are now open to women. Women are graduating from infantry school in the Army. So everything is open now. So combat soldiers that are females opens up additional challenges for VA support structures down the road. And then also how optimized is the support structure here for male dependents or same-sex, which is, you know, obviously is something else that's new within the last couple of years. And my last point is that career paths in the military are changing rapidly. The old rules on what it takes to get promoted or to have a successful career are being changed. It's now being discussed that you could homestead in the same location for a long period of time, and maybe your family stays in that area and the military person is forward deploying, or they're taking multiple tours in that same area. So spousal employment challenges may change because maybe they're not moving as much. There's on-ramps and off-ramps. You can come off of active duty, go into the reserves for a period of time, come back into active duty. So what does that mean in terms of what you need in those different stages? What it takes to make captain today or E9 on the enlisted side is different in terms of deployments and everything else. So it's a real interesting time right now, and I think all of those would shape the future response. And hopefully some of this may come up in some of our tabletop
Good.
discussions.
Thank you. And Mary, I know we need to get to the tabletop, but I don't want to exclude you here. You said something that I think is provocative for us all to think about, which is to think about the user, not the program. And it sounds so simple, but I think it's not. So can you, again, with an eye toward guiding the organizations in the room, what does that look like? What should they be talking about to really absorb that idea?
So, I mean, that really is hard. It's hard to think about the user because, it's so diverse. And evidence isn't always this fixed point in time. So, we have to think about the life course perspective of people. Where are they if they are a family with young children, or, do they have teens? Do they have older kids? I mean, what is it? Are they a family that's new to the military and they came in as a family? So they already have an established family and now they come in. And sometimes I know that in schools, we see a military family and we think they know how to be a military family and they may be very new. So I think it means stopping and talking and listening to people, and it's really hard to institutionalize that. So, there's rubrics that have to be established around, how we talk about things and how we think about families. Like, words matter. I know you and I were talking about, well, maybe we shouldn't say single parent. It can be disparaging, So how do we think about the way we talk to people? And what could be their expectations or experience? If we don't talk to somebody, we don't really understand and we can't listen. I think what's hard on the program side is because we tend to be fixers. Someone's telling you a story and in your mind you're thinking, oh, well, we could do that, and then we could do this, and then we could do that. I mean, we're kind of wired that way because we want to help people, but rather than seeing ourselves as part of this larger effort. And I think it means just really, really intentionally slowing down, expecting it, and expecting us inside our organizations to hold that as a practice. Like you would never want to go to a doctor, and it's terrible. I mean, you go in and they're looking at their iPad and not looking at you. Go, wait a minute. Put that down and see me. So that's what people want, and I think it requires some discipline. And it certainly requires people saying, we're not going to act like this. The one thing is MD Anderson did some interesting things in terms of their brand, but also their practice. So they used to say that they were, MD Anderson, cancer centers, and then they had all these researchers that were fighting with each other for attention, and they really cared about whatever it was that they were focused on. And they decided that they didn't like that. And if you'll notice their brand, it says MD Anderson Cancer Center, and then they took out cancer, the red thing, and it says, we're going to make cancer history. And what they decided to do as an organization to say, we're changing the way that we think about it. And we're all in this enormous mission together. And you may be good at this and you may be good at that, but you better start listening to what other people are learning. So, I mean, to be user-centric is also something we can learn from the technology companies and how they engineer thinking of the user first.
Great. Thank you very much. One of the, when you're trying to think about an unknown future, it's very hard to anticipate, well, what kind of unknown future do I need to think about? And I think folks, you all have given us ideas about what might be coming down the pike, but I think one of the other important insights that came from the leaders who participated in the effort was that there are often signals early in conflicts, and if you're paying attention to them, then you know what's coming. And so, for example, if the size of the military force grows, you can be fairly confident that a few years hence it's probably going to shrink. And if it's going to shrink, then you have transition issues. If people are becoming wounded and injured, you know that caregiving needs might rise. And if you know the profile of injury for any particular conflict, you know something about what kinds of caregiving needs. So part of what we have to put in place in the beginning is how we are going to pay attention and be watching for signals. Because I think leaders today feel like it took a long time to learn that lesson, that at the beginning, especially, people were kind of running and being reactive because they didn't know what to watch for. This is an opportunity to plan what to watch for and how we might respond. Okay, I'm going to reconvene us. I hope you enjoyed lunch throughout the day already. I think we've had some really nice insights about building battle plans, and I'm very excited now to be able to turn our attention to the awards for excellence in research on military and veteran families. And by the way, I think we should have a naming contest. We're trying to figure out what the definitive name for this award ought to be. We run a similar award in the work family space, and it was pretty easy to come up with exactly the perfect name there, the perfect person to name it after. And I don't know that it's been quite so clear here, so feel free to share your ideas. The ceremony is being live streamed, so we'll share the link with you later for those who want it. As Mallory pointed out, those of us at universities spend a lot of our time doing research, but at MFRI we also feel that it's our role to promote research, bring attention to excellent research, and to try to help organizations who are on the front lines to use research. So many people who are on the front lines say, I'm interested in evidence, I want to find really good evidence, but I don't know where to find it, I don't know how to pick it, I can't get to it because it's behind some journal firewall, then I'm not quite sure what to do with it. And this award effort is one small part of a larger effort to try to strengthen the connections between researchers and practitioners so that we can have not only research-informed practice, which we talk a lot about, but also practice-informed research, so that researchers have a better chance of doing research that will be relevant and actionable, which requires us to learn things, because we're not always trained very well about that, as well as trying to help practitioners make their work as rigorously grounded in evidence as possible. So it's completely understandable then why AUSA was one of the first organizations we reached out to when we wanted to create this effort. In fact, before we created this effort, because it seemed to us that there's no point giving an award if you don't have pipelines to practice and visibility. And Patty Barron, as you know, runs a very significant family-focused programming at the AUSA annual convention. She's been involved in the military family space for a long time, not just at AUSA, but at her previous employer, more than one, I think. And so she's just been such a generous and enthusiastic and welcoming partner, and I'm really excited to be able to have this event here. And all of what this building symbolizes in its connection to the military space. I have two other announcements today about new innovations attached to the award effort that I think will help to even more broadly expand its impact. I'm very pleased to announce that the Armed Forces Services Corporation has partnered with the effort, and they have very specific goals for doing so. And so I want to invite Mia Barb to join me at the podium and to talk a little bit about how they intend to use the findings of the research in their work.
Thank you. So at AFC Magellan Federal, we would like to extend our sincere congratulations to the winners of the research awards, as well as to all those who received honorable mentions. The collective brain power, curiosity, creativity, and insights resulting from each one of these studies is truly impressive, and we applaud your dedication to digging into these complex issues and for so willingly sharing your results and your findings. We're so thankful for the opportunity to collaborate with you and with MFRI. We're incredibly grateful for the research and best practices you develop because they so help so many within the military and veteran space. And our mission as a federal contractor working on many DoD programs where we have boots on the ground, we staff and program manage several human services programs working directly with military families and directly with active service members who are dealing with the chronic day-to-day stressors as well as the catastrophic things that can so often happen as part of military service. Being able to tap into the great minds and the research that's being developed and being able to actually practically apply that and be able to provide our insights back to the research community so we can kind of work together to help solve these very large, very important problems, I think is very exciting. So we look forward to doing that in the future. At AFC Magellan Federal, we believe that our mission and that mission performance starts with healthier lives. So thanks to your hard work, we hope to put this research into motion as part of our mission is to help the federal employees, service members, and veterans live happier, more productive lives. So thank you for all that you do every day to support such an amazing national resource that is our active service members, their families, and vets. They need us, and you provide the services that give them what they need day to day, and we thank you. Thank you.
So through the relationship with AFC, that will help practitioners in the contractor community use the research to make their programming better and to help their staff develop professionally. And Mia and I will be working in the coming months to figure out how best to get the research in front of their program staff, their program designers, and their program implementers. And of course, AUSA is helping us get the research out into the community of military families and into the nonprofit and advocacy communities. I'd also like to announce a new collaboration today between MFRI and Military Reach, now at Auburn University. Military Reach is a project of the DoD-USDA Partnership for Military Families. Its purpose is to bridge the gap between military family research and practice. And here focused a lot on the civilian community, DoD practitioners, as well as others. So it's completely accessible to anyone. To facilitate the DoD provision of high-quality support to military families, REACH focuses quite a lot on making research practical and accessible. The Military Reach team critically evaluates and synthesizes research that speaks to issues of family support, resilience, and readiness. I'd like to invite Mallory Lucier-Greer to the podium to say a little bit more about what we're going to be working on in the coming year.
They rarely think of vertically challenged people, but this little step stool is quite lovely. Like she said, I'm Mallory Lucier-Greer. I'm the principal investigator of Military Reach. And with us also have co-investigators, Dr. Catherine O'Neill and Dr. Jay Mancini. So Military Reach has been at Auburn University for a year now, and as Shelley mentioned, our goal is to really connect academia to the people who can use research, which is the people in this room, right? It includes family members, policymakers, helping professionals. And so part of DoD's mission is to have access to that knowledge so that they can make informed decisions for their policy and for their families. And so we have a library of research at militaryreach.org. And what's really nice about this, if you're like, gosh, I'm wondering about what do we know about PTSD and how that impacts the children, how that impacts the families. We have a publicly accessible library because we want you to be connected to the research too. And you might not enjoy the same things I do, as in like reading 30-page research articles, but the good news is that we create these brief one-pagers that talk about what are the key findings of this study. How can these findings be used by policymakers, helping professionals, and there's action-oriented folks, the policymakers, so helping professionals and policymakers. And so you can access those. So our partnership for this award is that we keep track in real time of the research that comes out that's relevant to military families. So hopefully in another month, at the end of this, and the end of December, we will have a comprehensive list of the research that's come out for 2018. And then we can say, all right, here's a working list that we can work from to award next year's award winner. So we appreciate this opportunity, and a minute to talk about REACH.
Yeah, Mallory is saving us a lot of work by identifying the candidate nominees, and then it'll go full circle because we just met last week about we're hoping to put a little icon on the research that's been recognized through the award process so that when people read those one-pagers, they'll see which ones have been identified as having exceptional quality. The award was created in 2015, and the goal really is to raise awareness about research, about excellent research about military and veteran families. We focus on identifying the single scientific article published in a given year that combines exceptional rigor with important insights about U.S. military and veteran families. We want to bring visibility, as I said. We also want to increase the impact of rigorous scientific evidence on programs, policies, and practices affecting military and veteran families. We want to strengthen connections between researchers and practitioners, and we want to raise awareness of research on military and veteran families across many disciplines. The winning paper is selected through a very rigorous multi-step process. You can't apply for this award, and if your research is being considered for it, you don't know that it's being considered until I send you a message that says, this really isn't spam. Please open the attachment. And the attachment is telling them that they've received an honorable mention or they've been selected to win. Each year, we have a panel of about 8 to 10 accomplished scholars in the space. We search for every article that's been published that focuses on military or veteran families in the U.S. And we typically start with a list of maybe, 2,000 studies about the military space in general. Sorry, Mary, I keep using that word. And whittle it down to about 700 contenders that are in the topic area or qualify in the topic area. And then we go through a series of multiple rounds of review and scoring to select the winning articles. I'd like to acknowledge the reviewers. So the reviewers of 2017 articles include Abby Gewirtz from the University of Minnesota, Mary Jo Larson, Brandeis, Mallory Lucier Greer, Auburn, Jay Mancini, Georgia, Julie Cederbaum from the University of Southern California, Lyndon Revere from the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, Ellen DeVoe at Boston University, and Amy Adler at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. Reviewers of the 2018, for the 2018 competition, Jim Martin from Bryn Mawr College, who's here, Jack Sy at Yale, Brianna Goff at Kansas State, Penny Pierce at the Uniformed Services University, Dawn Vogt at the Boston University VA Medical Center, Leanne Knobloch, University of Illinois, Valerie Stander at NHRC, Naval Health Research Center, Stacy Hawkins, U.S. Army Research. And I know most of them aren't here, but a few of them are, and I would like if we could acknowledge their service. They're very busy people, and it's a big job, and I appreciate very much their willingness to do this. All of the articles that we reviewed were meritorious and notable. It's always hard to just pick one. We did identify honorable mentions, and you have a document in your packet that tells you more about the competition. But the honorable mentions for the 2017 competition are titled Performance of DSM-5 Persistent Complex Bereavement Disorder Criteria in a Community Sample of Bereaved Military Family Members, published in the American Journal of Psychiatry. Pathways of Risk and Resilience, Impact of a Family Resilience Program on Active Duty Military Parents, published in Family Process. Kirsten Woodward is an author on that paper. She's here today. Differential Child Maltreatment Risk Across Deployment Periods of U.S. Army Soldiers, published in the American Journal of Public Health. In 2018, the honorable mentions include Associations Between Prior Deployments and Marital Satisfaction Among Army Couples, published in Journal of Marriage and the Family. Patterns of Vulnerability and Resources in U.S. Military Families, published in the Journal of Family Issues. And Consequences of PTSD for Work and Family Quality of Life of Male and Female U.S., Afghanistan, and Iraq War Veterans, published in Social Psychiatry and Psychiatric Epidemiology. I want to congratulate all of the folks who received honorable mention. And now I'm going to move on and present to you the winner of the 2017 competition. The winning article for the 2017 competition is titled, and we didn't have this event last year, that's why we're doing two, Post-11 Veterans and Their Partners Improve Mental Health Outcomes with a Self-Directed Mobile and Web-Based Wellness Training Program, a randomized controlled trial. This article was published in the Journal of Medical Internet Research and focuses on the challenges that post-9/11 veterans and their partners face during readjustment and reintegration periods. The authors of the paper are Janet Kahn from the University of Vermont, William Collins from College and Associates, and Robert Soltesek from Optimal Data Analysis. Janet and William are here, so I'd like to invite them to come forward and receive their certificates. And I'm going to ask you to take off your name tags before you come up, because they're going to take a picture. So let me welcome you to the podium. Good thing it's not a blank piece of paper.
There we go. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. That's what happens at graduation when you haven't paid your bill. You open your diploma and it's a blank piece of paper. And that includes your library books. You haven't returned your library books. We'll be welcoming Janet back up briefly to tell us about her study a little bit. I first want to announce the 2018 winner. The 2018 winning article is titled, "The Case of Adolescent Mental Health and Academic Success in Military Families." It was published in the Journal of Family Issues and focuses on military family structure and the effects that it has on military youth. The authors of the paper include Amy Laura Arnold, Mallory Lucier Greer, Jay Mancini, James Ford, and K.A.S. Wickrama. Can I invite the authors who are here to come forward? Thank you so much. Okay, now that we've got the presentations out of the way, I want to give each of the lead authors a few minutes to tell us about their research. We'll begin with Janet. We'll have a couple of minutes for questions, and then I'll invite Laura to come forward. So, Janet?
Nice to have a step. So thank you, Shelley, and thank you to the Military Family Research Institute. I want to say on behalf of William and Rob and myself, I think that we were very excited, I mean, beyond excited, to have this work noticed, in part because, you know, or most of you probably know, that in the field of healthcare in general, mental health or physical healthcare, it takes an average of 18 years to get anything from results to in practice, research results in practice. So anything that moves that forward, and you're doing a lot to move that forward, is deeply grateful. Now I would say, having been here today, I'm also grateful just for the opportunity to be in this conversation with all of you. So again, a double prize. I would correct you, I don't really think of myself as the lead author. I really think of William and me as being co-authors completely, and that it was pretty much a coin flip, or whose turn it was to be first author. So let's put that aside. Am I moving the slides? Who's moving the slides here? You don't have to do it yet. I just want to know who's moving them. Great. Yeah, more? Good. So, so as you've been told, what Mission Reconnect is a mobile and a web-based, self-directed program of instruction in both mind and body-based, or mind-body-based wellness skills to assist veterans and their partners in the challenging process of post-deployment reintegration. Is this going to move us? Oh, so we got there. Okay, so my other thank you is obviously to NIMH for 2 successive SBIR grants that made the development and the testing of this possible. The design of Mission Reconnect was guided by a few very clear facts on the ground that I'm sure motivate the work that most of the people in this room do, as well as a few principles of integrative healthcare, which you'll see as we go. The first is the recognition that the men and women returning from Iraq and Afghanistan in particular, since that was what was very active when we began this work, have come home quite often with multiple types of injuries. And these include, as you can see, physical and emotional and potential cognitive impairments, as well as moral injury, which is probably not new to this war, but a somewhat new term during this war. This Venn diagram is going to show you, if you look at the periphery at the single color parts of the circles, what you see is that it's fewer than 1 in 5, fewer than 20% of people return with only one problem. Everybody's coming back with a mix, and it's these complex injuries result often in relatively high incidence of suicide and of accidental drug overdoses and of alcoholism and overprescription by physicians and misuse of drugs by recipients. And so, simply put, the punchline for us really was looking at the situation that this kind of global or multidimensional suffering really requires a multidimensional response. And that is partly because, as others have discovered, when someone is suffering from a physical injury, has a physical injury, that injury is not as readily resolved or as well tolerated in a person who is simultaneously dealing with PTSD or any second injury as it is in someone who's only dealing with pain alone. So the question for us was, what do we have to offer these people? The problem that I just described has been coined post-deployment multi-symptom disorder by folks at the Polytrauma Center in Tampa. And what they noticed is what I just said, which is that focusing only on a single condition or symptom produces what they call suboptimal results. They called it treatment resistant, which is sort of blaming the situation instead of saying, boy, we really haven't figured this out yet, which I think was the situation. So we were trying to contribute to the figuring it out part. So that's one thing that was guiding us. In addition to that, we were aware that there were a whole slew of veterans and their families who were not receiving treatment. They were either untreated, going untreated, or undertreated, but for whom some kinds of treatment might have been helpful. And the reasons for this include everything you're seeing here, everything from simple denial, I don't really need any help here, to busy young families, they got young kids, 2 jobs, really busy, don't have time, to skepticism about either the VA itself and long wait times, or the treatments, bad side effects from pharmaceuticals, or mental health, I don't really think I'm mental, or concern about the stigmatization of a mental health diagnosis. People had concerns about that in terms of their military career, but also in terms of civilian careers, just not wanting it anywhere on their record. So that was sort of our second motivator. And finally, we were also aware of the veteran's family, and particularly of the veteran's partner, being simultaneously both a critical support for the veteran returning and also people who are now vulnerable to secondary trauma of various sorts. And so the question was, could we design something that would both leverage that relationship and support that relationship in each of the people in the relationship? And so we decided to create a program that was, based on those three concerns, create a program that was wellness-oriented, so had no stigmatization, addressed the whole person, body, mind, spirit, was patient-centered, and in this case, patient-driven, because we were giving them the reins of the program once we created it. Accessible, meaning you've got it, it's in your home, you don't have to go anywhere for it, you don't have to make any appointments, you use it whenever it strikes you as a good time to use it. Dyadic, supporting and leveraging the relationship. Inexpensive. Our hope was so inexpensive that the VA could just give it out to everybody upon return, in a sort of preemptive health promotion rather than, disaster response effort. And evidence-informed, meaning everything that we're teaching in this program comes from a body of evidence, whether it's meditation or positive psychology or massage. I mean, everything we're offering already had some evidence even before we went into this. And so we created self-directed instructional program of mind and body-based therapies available by web stream and also by mobile device for use by veterans and partners to support physical, mental, and relationship health, and offers instruction in couples massage and a dozen mind-body-based therapies and contemplative practices for them to use individually or together, and teaches skills that help people purposely self-regulate their neurochemistry to shift their moods and their thoughts on purpose. So that was the goal, and the things that we're teaching we clustered into 3 areas, which we referred to as reconnecting with yourself, now that you've come back, reconnecting with quiet, and reconnecting with your partner. And we had reason to believe that these techniques would help people to basically induce a generalized relaxation response. I mean, what we wanted to do really was come up under people. We are not really aiming to cure anything in particular. We weren't aiming ourselves or this program at PTSD or at physical pain. We were just saying, here are these people dealing with so much. What do we give them that will activate their own self-healing, basically? Provide them with a floor. So that's what we wanted to do. This is just to let you know there is a short video on our website that you can watch if you want to get a little bit more taste of the program. So in terms of the study design, we created a conducted a 4-armed clinical trial in which we had one arm that was obviously people receiving Mission Reconnect, and we were comparing that with a waitlist control, of course. But we also compared it with what we think of or thought of as sort of the gold standard program at that time, or another very reputable program called Prep for Strong Bonds that's delivered by military chaplains, and it uses a quite different model from ours, which is that it's a weekend retreat model. And so we wanted to see what we offered compared to that, and we also had a 4th arm, which was having people go away for a prep weekend, and then at the end of that be given Mission Reconnect to see if there was going to be a value add to combining these 2 programs. And we recruited 160 veteran partner dyads in 4 cities, chosen to be 4 different regions of the country because there's difference in complementary alternative medicine uptake in different regions, and we didn't know if that would affect use of our program. So we did that, and we were helped in that by Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, who just pumped out email messages to their membership in those cities, letting them know this opportunity exists. If you're interested in this research, contact these people. Okay, so we administered we had 160 couples, 320 individuals participating, and we administered a battery of both standardized and to some extent investigator initiative or generated instruments assessing various mental health outcomes at baseline, at 8 weeks, and at 16 weeks post-baseline. And the subjects in, is that what I meant to do? Subjects in Mission Reconnect arms were instructed to try each of the things that was available through the program at least once during the first couple of weeks, and to find what they felt was working for themselves, and then maybe hang with those more intensively. But we also asked them to do one at least 20-minute massage in each direction everyone being a partner, everyone being a recipient or a giver, once a week. The first question when you create a program like that is basically, if you build it, will they come? If you give them a program, literally, will they use it? And as it turned out, the answer to that was a pretty resounding yes, which was very encouraging for us. So here you can see the three clusters. If you go to the very bottom line that says totals for all activities, I can't tell, I don't know if I have a laser or not, so just go to the bottom line. And the first two columns that you see are for veterans, and the far right columns, is that right in your direction, are for partners. And what you see is that in the first 8 weeks, veterans used this program an average of 20.2 times. So a little bit more than 20 times they used some element within the program. And that amounted to 144 minutes, which is to say over an hour and 20 minutes during the course of a week. And for partners, it was pretty much the same. You can see the numbers are very similar. I don't have time to go into exactly which elements of it they were using and how that added up, but it is interesting, and you can find it in the article if you want to take a look at it. When we followed them 16 weeks out, what we saw was that the time fell off slightly for veterans and increased just a little bit for partners, but basically it didn't fall off much. They continued to use the program, we thought, pretty intensively. So the second question is, if people are using the program, is it doing any good for them? And the answer was yes, it was. And this is all color-coded for levels of significance, as you can see at the bottom. And the punchline is, it didn't do you a lot of good to be in the waitlist group, but if you were in the Mission Reconnect Alone group, what you see is that a number of the dimensions moved a lot. We had highly significant decreases in perceived stress, in depression, in PTSD symptomatology, and increases in self-compassion and the capacity to respond to stressful events, as well as sleep quality. When you go out to 16 weeks, it turns out that almost everything that was happening at 8 held, and some increased, and then sleep fell off slightly. If you look at PrEP alone, you see that it also was able to decrease perceived stress, depression, PTSD, and the effect of that increased over the extended time. When you go to ask whether combining those two programs had a value add, it's not clear it did. It touched more dimensions than PrEP alone did, but not than Mission Reconnect. So that's what we learned about that. We asked people to do pre-post, people who are receiving massage, to do a check-in on these 5 dimensions: physical pain, tension, irritability, worry, and depression, pre-massage, and then 15 minutes post-massage. And what you see here is that there was marked improvement on all those dimensions for both veterans and partners when they were in the recipient role. So you can draw your own conclusions. That's a quick run through the findings. Our own conclusions were basically that Mission Reconnect offers a widely accessible, low-cost approach to supporting the well-being and reducing many symptoms among veterans and their partners, and that we found veterans and partners willing and able to learn a range of practices that turned out to be helpful from them through a mobile app without any personnel costs, without anyone needing to be reminding them to do it or showing them how to do it, other than the videos and the audios that they access through the app. We believe that leveraging a partner relationship offers a viable approach to sustaining self-directed interventions. We imagine, although we have no data, that it's unlikely people would have hung in as well without someone else in the household doing it. That's our thought. And so we say that home-based and self-directed interventions might be of particular service to veterans who are distant from or averse to treatment for whatever reasons. So that's that. We have our own thoughts about next research, but you can just read that.
We have time for a couple of questions. Patty? Wait, the mic, sorry.
This is really interesting and definitely going to look into it. Were you able to separate National Guard from active duty in your testing, or did that not come up?
We did not separate them. And I will say in the final, among those 160 couples or 320 individuals, of whom 180-something were veterans, because there were dual vet partnerships, of course, also involved. We covered all branches of the military, but the numbers were not enough to really allow us to see whether people in certain positions, even just that division of guard versus active duty. Yeah.
If you covered this, I'm so sorry. It's fascinating. Was there how long did this study go? And did you see a fall off over a period of time as these things happen with interactive apps?
So we did only follow those people for 16 weeks, and the data that they were providing to us about what elements of the program they used in any given week, and their estimate of how many minutes they used it for, we had for the first 8 weeks, and then we asked it again at 16 weeks, but not for 9 through 15. So that's the duration. And what we saw was there was some difference between the first 8 weeks and the second 8 weeks, a little bit less time on the part of veterans, a little bit more time on the part of their partners.
Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you.
I think it's particularly notable, when we have so many conversations about pathologizing people and deficit-based models and the problems with those, and about stigma and people being afraid to come and get help. The idea that there could actually be something effective that anybody could use anytime and nobody would know you were doing it, that's actually therapeutic, is really quite notable. I want to invite Laura, I lost her, where is she? Oh, there you are, sorry, to come and tell us a little bit about her study. Thank you so much.
Ta-da. Hi. It is such an honor to receive this award on behalf of my co-authors, Dr. Mancini, Lucia Greer, Wickrama, and Ford. Before I share a summary of the findings from our study, I want to mention several people who played a significant contribution in supporting and making our study possible. Each person you see reflected here helped build our capacity to implement a large research study on youth within military homes. It certainly takes a team. We want to recognize M.A. Lucas for heralding the initial concept of this study and ensuring that our funding was secured. We also thank Child and Youth Services for allowing us to come into their youth centers and work with the youth in their communities. We want to recognize the families and the youth in our study for their time and their participation, as well as the team of professors and students at the University of Georgia who helped during the time of data collection and cleaning data and everything that goes into that. And of course, I want to recognize my colleagues who, without them, this paper would not be here. As I mentioned, Dr. Lucia Greer, Mancini, Ford, and Wickrama. Jay, your persistent dedication to the well-being of military members, veterans, and their families has broadly influenced the way we understand military members and how we serve this population. The impact on serving military and veteran families will continue to be seen in the decades to come. And finally, but most importantly, my colleagues and I deeply appreciate the roles that military members, veterans, and their families play in selflessly serving our country each day. We join in recognizing the women and the men of the military this Veterans Day, and we offer a humble thank you. I speak for both my colleagues and myself when I say that we are honored to be a part of the community of family scientists who are continuing the legacy of studying resilience and vulnerability among military members, veterans, and families. Our study is comprised of 995 youth from 4 active duty Army installations located in the Pacific, Western Europe, Northwestern, Northeastern United States. Our participants were between the ages of 11 and 18 years old, and they had at least one active duty military parent. Based on our review of the research on military families at the time, we saw gaps in knowledge in these 3 areas: the dynamic of family structures on youth depressive symptomology and academic performance, the process of parent-youth connections and youth's own self-efficacy on youth's depressive symptomology and academic performance, and the interplay of these processes and structures on youth's own well-being. Essentially, we wanted to know, how do family environments influence youth in military families? This is important to military families because we know the reality that many different types of family structures exist, and some youth experience more risk within family structures. Yet, if there are processes at work within these families that buffer the negative effects, we should know more about those and what they are so we can include them in our battle plans and reinforce these elements. Our study confirmed that indeed, youth currently living in step or single-parent families did face greater depressive symptomology and lower academic performance. When examining the youth reports on their connections with their parents, we found that in their self-efficacy, the resources, they operated as protective factors, and that the resources would protect the youth's depressive symptoms, and the connections with the parents resulted in decreased depressive symptomology and greater academic performance. And when testing how the structures and processes interrelate, we found that across family structures, parent-child connections and the child's own self-efficacy were positive influences on depressive symptoms and academic performance, regardless of family type. Our 3 takeaways were that military family structures are diverse. Over 3 in 10 youth were growing up in a family where both biological parents were not present. Secondly, family structures matters, but what matters even more is what family members do and how they relate with one another. And a good marriage is a good thing, but youth can also thrive in multiple family forms in the presence of healthy family processes. We take these findings as an opportunity to accentuate the positive elements and elevate the resilience of military families. Research has increasingly more to say about this group, and it's important to not get lost in the numbers. On a more personal note, this research was important to me because I have 11 family members who have or are currently serving in the military, and I've seen the sacrifices these families make. They are stretched, they are strained and tested. They are also incredibly resilient. We see these findings as the building blocks for professionals who are supporting military members, veterans, and their families. Our findings suggest that those desiring to influence military families and contribute to the overall health of military youth should focus their efforts on things that the youth have some influence on, the youth's own views and their beliefs about themselves, and the interactions that transpire within their families. At the end of the day, there is still more work to be done to better understand military members, veterans, and their families, and to better serve them. What does this mean for all of us? We each have a part to play, whether it's researching these important factors, translating that research into practice, delivering programs to these families, shaping policy, or serving our country to defend and protect its people. As President Roosevelt said, do what you can with what you have where you are. Thank you.
Laura, have you thought about replicating the study with the other branches?
That's a great question. I have not. I think it would be very beneficial. And I love that the takeaway I was telling Linda is so simple, that this factor of youth having say about their own development is a linchpin from which programs I think could really focus on to enhance relationships in the families.
I do like to ask questions. My question has to do with the step family structure. Did you find that it was because there was a sharing of households, like did the children live with one household that happened to be military and then would maybe have to go to a civilian household, or were they living in the military household the whole time as a blended family?
They were living in the military household, and so the variable was sort of a combined factor of the marital status of the parent and who they were living with. So they were living with that person.
I think so often in our society we equate family form with family function, and we focus on who's in the house as opposed to what they're doing. And so to have attention paid to all of these things I think is really important. And I also want to acknowledge Jay and his leadership for many years in the study of military families and in a focus on resilience and building strengths. And he's easing out a little bit of his career, and so it's really nice to have the opportunity to express appreciation in this way. And Jim Martin also has spent a long time studying military families and promoting their well-being, and has been involved in this research and on the committee, and we're really grateful.